please welcome Lauren Atwood here to our captivating conversations today. I'm going to read her. I am going to read just a quick bio about Lauren. Lauren began her role with the IDOC, the Idaho Department of Correction, at the beginning of 2024. As the Victim Services Coordinator, her role is to provide post-conviction victim services to victims of all felony crimes by supporting and assisting them during a residence incarceration at the Idaho State Prison or Community Reentry Center. Prior to her position at IDOC, Lauren's experience working with victims of crime has included working as a program manager and a case manager at a nonprofit center that serves victims of interpersonal violence in Ada County. Lauren has also received a bachelor's degree in criminal justice with a minor in communications from Boise State University. The services that IDOC provides to victims includes keeping victims notified of any changes to a resident's custody status, making sure that no contact orders are being upheld, assisting victims if they are receiving unwanted contact from a resident, and helping victims prepare for a resident's release into the community. Overall, Lauren is the contact for victims if they are needing support or assistance in any way during a resident's incarceration. So please, once again, welcome Lauren Atwood. Hi, thank you for being here.
Thank you guys for having me.
So I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple of questions. There's like 13 of them. I'm going to ask these questions and we'll just kind of go from there and see what spurs up in conversation. Okay. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background before joining the Idaho Department of Correction, and if you're comfortable, what made you want to get into victim services?
Yeah, so I have been at IDOC for about 6 months. I started kind of towards the beginning of 2024, so this year. And so within victim services, I had kind of a lucky chance to do a couple internships while I was in college. So I graduated from Boise State University with a criminal justice degree. And while I was there, I did one internship at a law firm that mainly does criminal defense.
Oh, okay.
And so I enjoyed my time there. Kind of through the process, I was kind of trying to see if I felt that spark for the work there. I did that, enjoyed it, and then right after that, the next semester, I did an internship with a local nonprofit here that serves victims of domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, and different interpersonal crimes. And so I did that internship too, and kind of just fell in love with the work of victim services. And so I interned there, graduated in 2022, and then I was lucky enough to get hired on right away at that nonprofit. And so I worked there as a case manager, as a program manager, and just really enjoyed working with victims of crime. It can be hard work, but it's very rewarding as well. So each person you work with has a very different story. You get to learn the members of your community, and it's just overall very rewarding. So I did that for a few years, and then I ended up applying to this position at IDOC as well, just because I felt kind of pulled in both directions from actually both of those internships that I did. And I'm just so grateful to see kind of both sides of the system there. And so my position now within IDOC is kind of just a mix of both of those, working with both populations, and I just feel so lucky to be able to do that. So that's so kind of how I fell into this role.
What a great background that you have, and I can see just you talking about your background, like the passion that you have behind it. So if you don't mind, can you describe your role at the Idaho Department of Correction, kind of what your day-to-day routine like? Walk us through what you do.
Yeah, every day is very different, just depending on kind of what's going on, who ends up calling that day, and kind of what needs victims have that day, that week, kind of even that month. And so my role, kind of my main job duties, are making sure that no contact orders are being upheld. So when the issuing court within the county puts a no contact order in place, more often than not, that no contact order follows the offender as well as the victim into when the resident is incarcerated. And so I make sure all of those are in our system and those are being followed. That's one of my main roles, and then also notifications. And so we notify victims of death of a resident, escape, and then full-term release.
Okay.
And so all of those are required notifications within my positions too. And And so those go out just by me. And then we also rely on a notification system called VINE, and that stands for Victim Information Notification Every Day. And that's a notification system that notifies on any changes in custody for a resident. So transfers or releases, if they're on probation or parole, a return to custody, any of those changes victims can sign up for as well. So my phone number is on all of the notifications that go out through VINE. So anyone receiving those notifications, if they have a question on it or need clarification, they can reach me.
Wow.
Yep, so that's a big part of my role too, is just making sure victims are informed of any changes while the resident is incarcerated, no contact orders, and then just overall working with victim service staff too, just to make sure in day-to-day decisions that we're making all day long with our populations that we're considering victims in those, whether it be we're thinking about moving someone to a reentry center or moving someone to do like off-compound work, making sure we're considering the victim's location and that, and making sure that they're not working somewhere close to where the victim may live.
Wow.
Yep, so different processes like that we do day to day, just making sure the victim's considered. So
Wow.
yeah, those are kind of my main roles, but the day to day is very different. It's kind of just what comes up and whatever the victim needs that week. I'm there I do work normal business hours, but if someone is needing something or if it's something urgent, I can be on calls for different things like escapes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Wow. That is a lot. How many victims would you say that you serve, like in your 6 months of being there? How many, just if you could estimate?
I'm not sure I have an exact number, but I would say, just to kind of put it into perspective, I am the one victim coordinator for all of the Department of Corrections. So all the facilities, reentry centers across Idaho, all the folks that we have incarcerated, I am the contact for the victim in that crime.
Wow.
So having about 9,000 residents or so, each of those residents that have a victim, and that could be a property crime, robbery, things like that, or a violent crime too, I am the contact for all of those folks.
That is a lot. That is a lot that a lot of people that you're talking to and stuff. I want to go back really quick to the relocation of a resident or, that. Do you know, has it always been something that they've brought victim services into? Is that a newer development? Do you know kind of the history with that? Because that's really interesting to me and really mindful of the facility and, those in charge to think of the victims in that.
For as long as I've been there, the 6 months, I know it's been in place. But I think for a few years at least, it is a part of the screening process for someone to be able to come to a reentry center too. So for all 5 of the reentry centers that we do have right now, every time someone is being considered to come to a reentry center, their application, if on their file it shows that there was a victim of their current crime, the reentry center staff will contact me. And usually the question is just their general location. So we're not really giving out ever the exact address of the victim. That's never happening. But it's just the general location, so like a district or sometimes county if we need to, just so we know where they should be probably restricted from going.
That makes sense.
So yeah, that's the information that I provide, but ultimately the reentry center is the one who makes that best decision there if they should come or not.
And that makes sense for the reentry centers because they're like a minimum custody. Those residents are out in the community.
Working.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Wow, that's really interesting. Like I said, very mindful of the staff to be thinking of that and stuff. So in kind of the broader community of victim services, at what point do your services come into play for the victims and for the victim's family? Are you only available once someone is in IDOC's custody?
Yes. And so kind of my role is working with the victim after a defendant has been convicted. And so they may be in technically IDOC's custody, but they may still be at the jail. So from that moment that they are convicted, I would be kind of their victim service coordinator, serving them with whatever they need at that point, and then all throughout that resident's incarceration. And so there is a parole victim coordinator as well. Thankfully, she is amazing to work with. And so she assists victims through parole hearings, that process, that hearing date. She'll work with them to assist them if they want to make a statement, attend the hearing, all of that. And so my role is mainly after conviction while they're incarcerated, and then up until that parole date, or if they're not paroled, just throughout the rest of their sentence if they're still incarcerated.
Okay. So if a resident gets parole and then they break their parole or probation or anything like that and they end up back in IDOC's custody, are you back to being the victim services? Okay. So
the parole victim coordinator, she will work with them to keep them updated about that parole violation. And so they may be in a jail, and Vine does a lot of notifications for return to custody. And so if that happens, they can contact myself. They can contact the parole victim coordinator too, just to get more information on kind of what happened there, and then what's kind of moving forward with that process. So for that violation, they may go back out into the community. They may come back to a facility. So that's the great part about myself and the parole victim coordinator working together, just because it overlaps a little bit, especially in those situations.
That's nice for those gray areas to have two people of support, just in case. So as far as the services and stuff like that, are victims invited to enroll in these contacting services? Do you reach out to them, or do they need to seek them out? And if they are seeking them out, where should they go, and what do you have available for them? You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but. Yeah,
I would say it's a little bit of both, and just depending on the situation. So for those situations like the required notifications of death, escape, or full-term release, I will always have, if I see that there's a crime that has a victim, I will reach out to the county of where the crime happened to get that victim's information, just to make sure we're doing that required notification. And so I will always attempt to notify. They can kind of reach back and say, hey, this isn't something that I want to be notified about moving forward. We'll make a note of that and not do that moving forward. But yeah, for those, we just want to make sure we don't miss them. And so for situations like notifications, parole hearings with that parole victim coordinator, we are the ones reaching out, typically to the county of which the crime happened in. And each county, or most counties, have victim witness coordinators that I'll reach out to. They worked with the victim. They can kind of give me context if that's needed too. I get their information and do those. But sometimes victims have a question or a concern, and or something they need to reach out about. In those situations, sometimes they'll just have my contact information, or the parole victim coordinator's contact information if we've talked to them already and they can reach out. But my information is on the IDOC website. And so I have a general email on there that's just Prison Victim Services. They can reach out on there, and it has my phone number too. And then those Vine messages that go out have my phone number as well. So we really just try to push my phone number, email, everything out there, so that if a concern comes up, they know who to reach out to.
That's fantastic. Do you have a lot of victims who don't want to hear anything about the resident or what's going on with their terms?
I would say they're far and few. We have, I would say, more so for those required notifications of death, escape, and full-term release. I'm not reaching out too often, and they're typically things that the victim does want to know about. So not too much for those, but they do have the option to sign up for Vine or not to get those automated notifications for any transfers, and transfers can happen all the time, so they may be getting multiple notifications throughout a year just on any changes. And so they do not have to be signed up for Vine if they don't want to.
Okay.
It's just kind of that extra support there if they're wanting to get more detailed notifications.
That makes sense. I'm sure for a lot of people that would bring a peace of mind just knowing what's happening. And I'm sure for a lot, not being attached to it at all is something that works for them. So that's really really interesting.
Yep, everyone's different. So we just try to support them where they're at, whatever they need. It's completely up to them if they want to receive those or not.
Oh, that's fantastic. So because you kind of worked in a nonprofit level, county level, do you feel like, is there a difference between any of the philosophies for what you do from that nonprofit county level to now the state level that you're at?
Yeah, I would say, so my role when I worked at a nonprofit with victims was more so at the beginning of their journey, and really when they're first ready to make a report, or they don't want to report but they need assistance with safety planning, or they need a place to stay. Kind of that beginning process where they're first making those decisions. And you're really just there to assist them with whatever they decide. So that's kind of where my experience in victim services started, is assisting at that time frame. And so now it's pretty different that I'm working with victims at post-conviction, where they've gone through that thinking process, gone through making those decisions about what they want to do they want to report. The hearing process has happened. They worked with county victim witness coordinators, prosecutors, whoever it may be during that whole trial process. And then they finally have been convicted. And I would say, too, that's something that's kind of interesting that I even learned through my position, too, is the services and assistance needs to continue after that point, too.
Yeah.
It's not over. They have questions during incarceration. They have questions when parole hearings come up, release comes up too. So it's just a very different time frame that I'm working with victims at that point too. And there's similarities in that with safety planning for releases, and the same kind of safety planning you're doing when they're first deciding what they want to do at the beginning of that journey. So there's a lot of crossover, but I would say the main difference is just that timeline.
Yeah. How has that changed for you personally, going from, when they first really need you to them going through, they still need you, but they've gone through this. How is that for you personally? Did that change your philosophy in the way that you do things for the victims?
Yeah. It's definitely a different experience. Just with this work, you really care about the people and the victims that you're working with. And so when I was working with victims at the nonprofit I was at, it was very much worrying about their safety. Kind of they're going home, they may not be safe in the community. Now my role is pretty different, that that person is now incarcerated. There's not that kind of extra sense of worry about their physical safety most of the time. And so that's kind of been helpful for me too. It's definitely kind of switched the safety planning and things we do together, but it's all still important in that healing process. It's still continuing. So I think for me, it's just making sure that they know that just because this person has been convicted, their services are not done. They have people here to support them, even after they're released too. Yeah. So they can reach out at any point, and I will always answer the phone.
That is so meaningful, really. How does the job change if you're working with an adult versus maybe a minor of a crime, or even a family or group versus like an individual? Is there differences in that? I'd say with that would come up. So if it's an adult, I'm mainly doing those notifications, working with the victim themselves. If it is a minor, we are working with the victim's parents or whoever that guardian is at that point in time to get them that information or answer any questions most typically. For children, something that kind of sticks out is another part of my role, just working with IDOC staff, is assisting volunteer service coordinators with screening to make sure that
no one is reaching out to their victim. Or I know you guys had someone here speaking about StoryLink too.
Mm-hmm.
That's a process that I help with as well to make sure and screen that this individual is not trying to send this to their victim.
Oh, wow.
We're not violating any no contact orders in that too. So that's something that comes up a lot with kiddos, is just making sure that we're doing those extra precautions just to make sure we're not re-traumatizing anyone with any of the great programs that we have too.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, that outside contact through these volunteer services coordination and stuff like that, where they might potentially be able to get in contact with their victim.
Yep. So they're great about sending those all to me. I'll screen them all and just get back to them as quickly as I can, just to make sure they can go through with that.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And then as far as families, I would say that kind of comes up more if the victim is deceased. And so the county in that case, so I'll kind of go off of who the county considers the victim of record in that situation. So if the victim is deceased, typically they have the victim's family, whoever really wants to be the victim of record in that case, as the person that I would get the information for. And so in those situations, I speak with the family most of the time to do all those same services. But if a family member is calling and they're concerned about the victim, I will answer any questions and do all those same services too. So,
okay.
Yep.
And does that work on the other end? Like if your victim, like family is also affected by what the victim's going through, do you have programs for them? Do you help the family members even if they're not the direct victim of the crime?
Yep. I can answer kind of any questions and assist them in that same way too. But I would say a large part of my role is really referring back to and getting them connected with community resources, whether it's for counseling, case management, like tangible resources, that kind of stuff, connecting them with local centers and things like that that have the resources to do that, just if they're not familiar with those in their area too. So a lot of that is just connecting them back there to get support in that end too.
Okay. Wow. Is there, one of our staff members wanted me to pose this question, is there a difference between like the different type of crimes, like maybe property crime versus a violent crime, the way that you do stuff with the victim, or is it all the same and you just help as you go depending on their situation?
Yep. So for any crime, whether it's property crime, a violent crime, we will treat all those victims the same. They'll get all the same resources through myself and through the parole commission too with their victim coordinator.
Okay.
It doesn't depend on the crime, the severity of the crime, anything like that. We just want to be there for anyone that was affected by a crime.
Yeah. And for any of the property crimes, do you help with finding resources for maybe like getting their livelihood back, maybe the money, possessions? Do you help them find those resources for that? Yeah.
So something that can be issued by the county typically is restitution. And so that's something that kind of follows the resident during their incarceration. If they're on probation or parole, restitution is following them to pay back to the victim. So monetarily, with anything like that, that is something that's issued by the county and IDOC enforces.
Okay.
And so if they have questions on restitution or why they may not be getting payments or things like that, if they were told by a county that they will get paid this restitution, I'll be there to kind of explain that process and how that works, connect with the right people to get my own questions answered about kind of the situation there and get that back to them. And then the parole commission does the same thing too, with typically connecting with the parole officer in that situation to make sure that restitution is getting paid. And then there's other resources such as like crime victims compensation that they can apply for, that can go towards like counseling, medical needs, things like that too, that I can give them information for as well.
Okay, that's amazing. Like just having those resources available. And I did not know about the restitution and IDOC being able to enforce that from the county level. So that's really great. We kind of talked about this before, but just so we have this question, how much interaction do you have with victims versus like anyone who's currently incarcerated, those who, are the residents there? Do you have much interaction with the residents at all?
Yeah, so right now, no. And so my office is at IDOC central office, so I'm not at a facility or anything. And so most of my work is really just talking with victims on the phone, by email, most of the time. I do sometimes work with residents too if they have a question, or maybe they knew that their no contact order was amended and it didn't get sent to me for whatever reason. They can reach out to me and say, hey, there was a change in this. Can you get this updated for me?
Oh, okay.
Or any questions they have about maybe a victim flag on their file, things like that too. They'll reach out for with just some questions, but I know the facility staff too is great about answering those questions if they come up as well. So right now, no, but IDOC is looking to start in the future a couple of restorative justice programs. One of them is called the Victim Impact Program, and that's kind of just an overview, is about a 13-week program where it's going into the facilities and leading a class that teaches them about victims of crime, trauma, the effects of a crime on a victim too. And so, yeah, that would be kind of where my role would, if I were to be in a facility, would be kind of doing things like that.
Yeah, so right now you guys, do you have restorative justice programs available at all inside the facilities, or is this something that you're looking to do?
It's definitely something we're getting started on right now. We are actively trying to do that too. So myself and then 4 probation and parole officers recently actually went to Virginia to meet with their DOC, because they are kind of great leaders in restorative justice too. So they do that victim impact program. Myself and those probation and parole officers actually went and got trained on how to do the class too. And so we went there, got trained on the class, and just brought back that information to our staff too, just to share about how impactful that really was for their populations there. And then looking into other programs too, just doing kind of the research right now on what would work best for us, just because it is me right now too. So for some of those things would just require staff and getting people on board. But IDOC has been great with just backing these ideas and programs, and I think everyone is really excited to get things like that started.
Yeah. When you went to this conference in Virginia, or you went to their Department of Correction, what about those restorative justice programs? Like, was there anything that really stood out to you that you think could be really impactful here in Idaho, or just with, just in general?
Yeah, just learning about that program overall, it was amazing to hear about. They actually have about an hour-long video they made on the program too, where you hear from incarcerated individuals that have taken it, and just the impact that it's had on them. And throughout the video, you can hear them talk about, I've taken this course and this course, but this victim impact program has been so impactful on me and has been the main thing that's kind of changed my thinking and thinking about other people. Yeah. And so just, hearing about how it's affected their populations there too. Something that also stood out is that they have victim speakers that come to the classes. Okay. And so each week for that program, they cover a different kind of crime each week. And so some of those weeks they'll have a victim speaker of that crime come and talk about their story, how it impacted them, how they're doing today. Yeah. I think it's just really different to hear about something and hear a story or read something versus you're hearing from that person too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they have a lot of great speakers there too that we were able to hear from in the training that we went to as well. So just hearing them speak, you can just imagine in a group how impactful that would be.
Yeah, just the classes themselves to help residents be more trauma informed and going through all these different aspects of what the victims go through and what they might be feeling, but to hear from an actual victim as well. I hope that our Department of Correction, can come up with that, because that would be really impactful. We know that the Idaho Department of Correction has a lot of rehabilitation type of programs that are currently going on. There's a lot of opportunity for residents there to be involved in what they're doing and spend their time, getting either classes or degrees, but something like that where you can help in that counseling aspect too would be fantastic. Wow, that's really great. So our goal in our exhibits and stuff is to humanize the experience for the men and women who worked and served time here at the Old Idaho Penitentiary. Since obviously this is a prison and we have our cells and all of those are our artifacts and stuff, we primarily focused on the people who were incarcerated here. And sometimes I feel like that we overlook the impact of their crimes on the community and on victims. So do you, or maybe you have an idea or not, but just from your experience, do you have an idea of maybe how we could improve our interpretation better to include the experiences of victims and their families, and anything that maybe we should be informed about as we talk about the history of the site?
Yeah, something that's just coming to mind too is there are a lot of different months and things, and in April there's National Victims' Rights Week too. So that's something that just kind of came to mind too, is maybe for that week in April, I don't know if you all would have kind of the information on the victim in these cases and in that crime too, but just trying to highlight that as well. And I think just overall, if you're explaining someone's story and that incarcerated person's story too, I think just trying to think of the victim and really humanize them as well, and just thinking of it in a way that if this was someone, a family member or a friend that this happened to, would you want to leave certain details out? Would you want to explain things in a certain way that that victim would kind of be okay with having their story told in that way too? So yeah, I think there's a lot of different weeks that highlight victims and different opportunities for that too, that could come up where that could kind of be the highlight of it.
That's great. Are you guys taking notes out there? Okay, perfect. In your 6 months that you've been in this position and stuff, have you noticed that the victim services, has it contributed to the development of the rehabilitative programs or philosophies for the incarcerated population? I mean, we kind of just talked about that restorative justice program and stuff like that, but is there anything else?
Yeah. Yeah, those programs I think would be the biggest thing to really influence and impact incarcerated folks. That program is just one out of the many that other states are doing too. There's another one that's kind of big around states called Victim Offender Dialogue.
Okay.
And that's where this program, it would be initiated by the victim, but it's essentially a mediated conversation between the victim and the offender in that situation, with a trained mediator for healing on both ends, to have a conversation, get questions answered, things like that it is victim initiated, but it can be super healing for both ends. If one end is wanting questions answered, or someone is expressing remorse, things like that, those can happen there in kind of that healthy environment with a third party there too. So that's a conversation that I know there's a lot of prep in that too, for even about a year of prep work before that even happens. And so that's, I think, the biggest thing that would be impactful within victim services is just those programs too. And then another thing states are doing that I would really want to get started with in Idaho too is just getting them involved in things like Victims' Rights Week. I know other states are doing things like poster competitions for victims' rights, and just getting smaller activities started too, putting things out on IDOC social media for victims, bringing attention to those kind of matters as well. Just overall, those smaller things can make a big impact too. So yeah, I would say those programs, and then just day-to-day things that are smaller that you can get just victims brought into the conversation.
Yeah, hearing you talk about this, I know you've only been there for you're going to make such an impact at this facility and within this program. I can just see it, just the passion that you have for it and the ideas that you have. I'm so excited to see where you are in a year or two.
Yes,
because
I'm very excited, and all the staff at IDOC is very supportive of restorative justice programs, supporting victims, and so they make it pretty easy to bring those ideas to them. Other staff, even at facilities, reentry centers, wherever they are always asking questions, making sure victims are being informed of things too. So yes, I'm the only staff member with that title, but all the staff there is just helping me out all day long, getting questions answered, bringing information to me to make my job easier.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, and like you were saying, for IDOC to be able to post a little bit more about victims or awareness and stuff like that, that's something that we talked about before this. Is one of the reasons I wanted to have you here is because obviously we are a historic prison. We, like I said, focus on those who are incarcerated here. And even as we've been going through, nowadays we've been trying to learn and humanize the stories of the people who lived and worked here, because even those who are incarcerated here, they all have lives, they all have stories, but to see the other side of it too, sometimes that we don't think about when we're telling these stories, those who were impacted in the community, the victims of these crimes. It's a facet of history that I think, especially in this type of history, gets forgotten sometimes because they're not the names that we have documented all the time, So to hear you talk about this and how we can add more into that, and it really fills my heart.
Excited to see it.
Yeah. So I think that was mostly what I had for you. Do you have anything else that you want to add about it? About your job?
Not that I can think of. I think it's just for my position too. Like I said, I've really just learned for the sake of victims and healing and everything like that, with supporting them too, is they need that at post-conviction too, during the hearing process, when they're first deciding to report or not report to, kind of throughout that whole process, and it's kind of forever ongoing too. So yeah, I'm thankful to have just my role in that too, because it is kind of niche and specific, but I've really learned that too of yes, they've received, they were able to get justice throughout that system, but it doesn't stop there. So I think it's just, I'm super grateful to be here and be able to talk about victims. I appreciate any opportunity to kind of bring light to the topic. So
yeah, we love hearing about this and stuff. And obviously this is I can imagine a difficult job, especially being the only person kind of in this position and having to, cater to so many people. Is there programs that IDOC has for you as an employee for self-care? Is there things that you do outside to help with that?
Yeah, so IDOC does have a wellness coordinator for our staff too, who is amazing. And she was actually able to create like a wellness app for all IDOC staff too, so not just myself, but all staff as well. And so she created that for us, and it can, it just focuses on different topics like burnout, compassion fatigue, things like that. And then it also has like connections to counselors and things like that too. So yeah, especially within victim services, it can be easy to forget to take care of yourself too. And that taking care of yourself will just help you help victims more too. And so yeah, that's really something I've just focused on throughout my whole career. It's just focusing on self-care, because that's gonna help yourself as well as the victim too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm glad we were able to connect. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions for Lauren? Roll a round of applause.
First of all, do you know if maybe you said you guys watched, or that the Virginia system put out, if that's viewable on YouTube or something.
Yeah, so that is on YouTube. Yes, they have one for that program, and I think they might have one for, I could be wrong, but victim offender dialogue too. But the victim impact one is just a 50-minute video. It got my attention the whole time just because it was so amazing to watch. But yep, that's on YouTube.
Yeah, I'd love to just know kind of more about the possibilities of programs like that.
Yeah, I can send that over to you guys.
That'd be amazing, yeah. And then you kind of partially answered this, because I was going to ask what constitutes a victim that would receive your services, and one example I had was, maybe someone who was deceased, right? Would, then be the families, the loved ones. And, but what about if it's, say someone who was, say a grand theft charge from a company, does the company receive? You know what I mean?
No, yeah, that's a great question.
What is kind of the line? I guess?
So it would be the victim of the felony crime that occurred. And so the victim of record is the person that is the victim in that case for which they're currently serving time for. And it has to be that felony charge. So that can make it kind of difficult if the felony charge in a case ends up being a controlled substance charge, and then it was misdemeanor domestic violence. Technically, for me, they're not a victim of record, unfortunately. It has to be that felony charge. So, that can be grand theft too. It can be a business. For businesses, we don't do those same notifications typically because if it's a larger corporation, yes, exactly. But if it's a smaller business, we will do those too. But yeah, overall, it's that victim of that felony crime for which they're currently serving time for. So if it was, let's say they're currently incarcerated, but they've been previously incarcerated for a different crime a few years back that they already served their time for, and there was a victim, they would not technically be a victim of record in that case, unfortunately, either. It's just that current charge.
Makes sense. Yeah, those are amazing services that I ever even thought about, so it's excellent.
It seems like overall in society right now that sexual assault and things like that are quite underreported. Do you find in places like Virginia where they're really trailblazing for restorative justice that it increases?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not quite sure about other states, but I know within Idaho, I think really those nonprofits and smaller centers that are really bringing victims in and letting them make the choice of, you can report, here's the process, let me help you along the way, or if you don't want to report, here's what else we can do. I think that has really had a huge impact too, and just giving them the ability to make their own choices in that process, I think has a big impact on if folks report or not. Mm-hmm.
Where are some of those places that victims can go to do that reporting? Is there websites? Is there, what are some of those, if you don't mind naming some of those places, in case anyone sees this video and needs to know?
Yeah. My knowledge is really within Ada County too, so I'll name a couple here. But the Women's and Children's Alliance is in Boise, Idaho. I know they are specific to domestic violence, sexual assault, really interpersonal violence. And so they can assist with those processes too. They have a great shelter in Ada County too for victims who are wanting to flee. Women's and Children's Alliance, Faces of Hope is another great one as well. Kind of the same process there for interpersonal violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking. They do a great job at supporting victims when they're first wanting to make that choice to report or just make a change. What was the other one I had? There's the Nampa Family Justice Center in Canyon County that does similar things too. And so I believe on the Parole Commission's website, there is a long list of different resources like that in the community too. So the Parole Commission, their victim service page, I think there's a tab that just has that list of them there too.
Awesome. Awesome. Does anyone else have any other questions?
You kind of mentioned sometimes a victim is incarcerated. How do they get word of transfers, or are you consulted first, or how does that work out?
Yeah, that can be interesting, and I mainly work really with county victim witness coordinators in that process too. So the county that is prosecuting on that crime that they are a victim of, I am kind of a liaison that I can get the victim witness coordinator, let's say with Ada County, connected with that incarcerated individual, and usually it's through connecting them with that person's case manager, and they will reach out and let the individual know their rights as a victim, and get them involved in that case too. So it's really relying on those county victim witness coordinators that do that work too. I would say I really don't get too many questions and things to myself from our populations. I would say that's kind of the main point there, is just making sure they have that contact there. And so the counties are great about making sure that they're treating that victim as a victim that they would treat in the community too, and just making sure they know their rights, they know the process, and kind of keeping them up to date with that, those hearings and things.
Is there anyone at the Department of Correction, let's say a victim who's currently incarcerated from another victim, or a resident who's currently incarcerated, like if something happens inside of the facility, is there someone for a resident to go to talk about maybe something that happened to them while they were inside the facility?
Yeah, I don't know if it's anyone specific within IDOC staff, but I think just any trusted staff member to them, whether it's a counselor, a correctional officer, they should all be taking those steps to make sure that's being taken care of. I know if we do know something happens for placement, we'll make sure that they're not placed in the same unit, the same tier, in the same area, just to keep them safe during that. So I know IDOC really takes the safety of our incarcerated populations very seriously. And so, yeah, just even if nothing is prosecuted and they're not necessarily a victim in a case that is kind of taken forward, they'll still make sure that those different things to keep them safer in place.
Very cool. Awesome. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you,
We really
guys.
appreciate it.